Brendan Thompson, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Been a little while.
It has, but just so you know, you were actually a fan favorite when you came on last time to talk about speed and conditioning for soccer players. So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it is. I know it might have rubbed a couple people the wrong way, but hopefully it, created some positive impacts in the soccer conditioning community. I know it's a tough topic for some to wrap their heads around, but sometimes we have to have those conversations to move things forward.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it was the discussion about the time to mile as a fitness test and how we just need to scratch that all together. So it definitely did ruffle some feathers, but in a good way. Today's topic is more on acceleration. And in the soccer community, parents like to call it explosiveness or giving players that first step burst. So let's just start off by defining acceleration and then we'll go from there.
So the way that I think about acceleration is how fast can I build speed? How quickly can I go from point A to point B? And, I might not even hit top speed, but how quickly I can get up to speed within that short burst is how I would kind of define acceleration. It's like, there's some athletes that take forever to build speed, especially in track and field. You might see somebody who can build speed for 60 to 70 meters. You might see someone who can get up to speed in 40. But my goal for a lot of the field sport athletes I work with is to get up to speed as soon as possible. And so the closer that we can make that top speed attainable, the more impact that's going to help that athlete have on the field in training and practice and more.
With acceleration, what are some of the first things you start working on with a soccer athlete?
So I go through several progressions, but we start with a dynamic warm up, and then at the end of the warm up, I begin to introduce the concept of acceleration, which basically, kind of like I just said, hey, we've got these speed qualities, and we've got to get up to speed now. And there's all of these little mistakes that people make when they're accelerating. And what we want to do is we want to use some drills to hopefully iron out some of those mistakes or at least make them more abundantly clear so that I can address them within the session. So I start with like the A series, which is the A march, A skip, and the A run because I feel like those piston mechanics and getting athletes to learn how to drive from their hips and make meaningful foot contacts with the ground. If you can take advantage of your biomechanics, you're already going to have a step up on everybody. But when you actually start to get stronger and get quicker and you can still execute those mechanics, now we really start to separate, especially off that initial burst. So I start with the A series. I'll get into some different bounding, skipping for distance, things of that nature. Maybe some horizontal jump series. So like the broad jump, the triple broad jump, the standing triple jump. And then by the end of all of that sort of movement prep and drill prep, we get into actual starts. And initially, I want to see how they move when they're accelerating. And if I see different faults, I'll correct them. I'll talk about how we can apply some of these drills and get them, to become clear within the actual skill of accelerating. But then I also like to challenge their acceleration with things like kneeling starts, resisted sprinting, hill sprints. I've got a shred mill now, which has been fantastic in building the specific strength and force qualities that you need to be an elite accelerator. So, we kind of attack it from all angles. We get into some medicine ball work, and everything is mostly about creating horizontal displacement. So, we're going to skip for distance, jump for distance, we're going to throw for distance. And all of these things sort of make up the acceleration theme that I try to keep constant throughout one of those Excel sessions.
Now, as far as the conventional start, what are you looking for in their posture and the arm positioning and even those first few steps, with the knee drive and where the hip's placed?
So some things I like to look for are first, I just like to see how they load their 2 point stance. And a lot of times athletes are sort of tall. They might have like a small knee bend, but they're leaning forward and they're tall. And the disadvantage there is that not only is the center of mass going to be higher than what would be ideal, but also they're not loading their springs to actually uncoil in that first step. So I like to bring up like a vertical jump. Am I more likely to jump as high as possible on the vert mat if I go from a taller stance or from loading that stance into a deeper, hips are flexed, knees are flexed, ankles are locked and loaded, and then everything sort of uncoils all at once. So before we even get rolling, those are the big three things is within that stance, are you loading your hips, knees, and ankles? If you're not, let's start there. You're going to add some displacement to your first step like that. The next thing is how quickly do you come up? So for me, I see a lot of field sport athletes that come up very quickly. So they might take one or two steps and they're already upright. And the problem with that is that while on the field, it's advantageous because they have to obviously read the field at all times. They need to be seeing where's the ball coming from, where's it going, what's around me. You always have to sort of assess your surroundings in field sport, which is much different than track. um, I try to get them to be able to flip a switch so that, hey, we're in training right now. I want you to practice these fundamentals so that maybe when you're in your game or you're in practice or you're in training, that, yeah, you can look around still, but you'll still be able to obtain a good acceleration despite having, your head up and scanning the field. So I try to get them to what I call rise like an airplane. And basically they start in this, they're locked and loaded in this leaning position. And then every step they take, their body should be gradually rising like this. The problem becomes when they start in this nice low stance and then they take one, two steps and they get to here. So they never really give themselves a chance to push and create momentum and create separation and build into faster speeds because they completely axe the acceleration phase of their sprint and they just get into upright mechanics.
So what distance should they be in that forward lean position?
So the changes for everybody. If you have a stronger athlete who's very efficient and very quick and a skilled accelerator, they might be able to drive, 20, 30 meters or more. Whereas someone who's a little weaker, a little slower with their frequency, not as efficient, maybe they're overstriding a little bit, that's going to force them to stand up sooner. So I don't really have a concrete distance that I say, like, you must be down this long or you must be up by this point. What I rather see is that they gradually work their way up into top speed and that they're able to achieve those next gears when they transition. So some athletes never actually leave acceleration mechanics and they just run like this for forever. They've heard the cue before, like stay low, you got to stay down. And so their chest is like down, forward. They've got all these backside mechanics, and it's just a big train wreck because they can't shift to gears 4, 5, 6. They get to about gear 3 and then they just live there. And it's like, how are your splits identical from 20 meters to 30 meters to 40 meters? Like, you're a small, fast, skilled player. You should still be accelerating. And you can't continue to gain speed if you don't graduate your body to these more advanced positions.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I don't really tell them a certain distance. I just kind of let them feel it out and say, look, don't fight what your body's telling you to do by forcing yourself down. But I also don't want you to think like hey, I'm at 15 meters and I need to be up because there can still be another 10 meters of acceleration in there. And we just stopped that progression. And now they're going to kind of stall their engine momentarily and then try to hit, gears 4, 5, 6, but they might only hit gears 3, 4.
It's super interesting because I had a dad make a comment the other day. Oh, well, soccer players should always be in that forward lean for every sprint they do. So let's talk about why we need to be doing speed training to improve acceleration, why we do eventually need to get upright.
Initially, it's important to keep that lean because it starts our center of mass moving forward. Like if I were to just tip my body forward and continue to lean, I'll eventually either fall on my face or I'll start walking faster, one or the other. But at some point, your legs can't recover to the front quick enough, and you've become so push dominant in what you do that your feet end up way behind you while you're sprinting. And so what this does is that if we have a sort of balance between front side and backside mechanics and we're heavily skewed towards the backside, we don't have enough time to bring that foot up and recover it to the front side to then apply force and continue to get to faster speeds. And so to achieve that, you've got to achieve or shoot for a taller position that starts to displace more vertically. And now we're creating more space between our foot and the ground. So when we're heavy front side, when we're heavy backside, our front side is only going to recover to about this high off the ground. And it's almost like controlled falling. So rather than like getting into an aggressive position and really attacking the ground, we only get this much space. So if I'm swinging a hammer and I've got to bury a nail in one or two swings, I'm not going to be able to do it. I'm going to have to tap, 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 tap because I just don't have the displacement to come down and hammer that nail in. Same thing. If my foot is only recovering within a couple inches of the ground, I just don't have the time to actually put force down. So I'm just sort of spinning my wheels rather than attacking. If I get to those taller positions, now suddenly that space goes from this, where my foot is just sort of barely getting to the front in time to keep me going, to now I'm getting about 6 to 8 inches, maybe more, depending on the athlete's height. And now I can really accelerate that foot down and put more force down, which is going to help me get faster. All of that to basically say each gear that an athlete can achieve is associated with a certain position. And the first positions are almost always going to be this big forward lean. And then as we keep going, so gear 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, somewhere here, and now you can hit faster and faster positions because you progress to those more advanced postures. But if you just stay forward forever, you're going to kind of get locked into a gear and never be able to achieve a faster speed without putting your body at excessive risk of like a hamstring pull, or you're going to start digging your heels in and maybe start experiencing shin splints or things like that.
So there's different schools of thought in the soccer community as far as acceleration and speed training. And on one end, it's we need to train soccer players like track athletes, which I get in terms of cleaning up mechanics and making sure that they're producing horizontal vertical force. But then there's the other side where they're like, we need to make it super sport specific. Where do you stand? Are you in one camp or the other? Are you more in the middle?
I think in terms of preparation, there's an element of track principles that are going to be beneficial to learning those mechanics. But that being said, I've got some athletes that are, high level soccer, whether they're in college or really elite high schoolers. I've got a guy in the MLS, and I see that these very low feet mechanics are almost always present. Low knee drive, feet are always low to the ground, very choppy, very quick. And after attending my first MLS game, I kind of started to think more about this, and that it's important for them to have their feet low to the ground due to the shifty nature of the sport. But it's also important for them to understand how they can utilize track mechanics within that framework to keep themselves healthier and performing better for longer. So what I notice a lot is that, these athletes with the low knee drive excessively reach out in front of them, and then they get little hamstring tweaks all the time. And if they would learn how to interact with the ground better in a more technical, um, you know, efficient way, maybe those hamstrings wouldn't be so stressed all the time and so strained all the time, and they'd be less likely to run into some of these little setbacks. So I think there's a blend of the two that needs to be found, and that you just kind of have to find a balance within your own framework of knowledge and your own coaching skills to figure out what works best. But to go full track doesn't make much sense because athletes are rarely going to have the time to exhibit some of those more patient technical track patterns. But at the same time, going full sport means that they're only going to be practicing uh, non, I won't say non efficient, but efficient soccer mechanics that might not be efficient or technically sound for their health and longevity in the sport.
Yeah, it's interesting we're discussing this because usually when soccer players lack that first step, it's not just because they're bad accelerators, but they're not fast thinkers. So how are you combining both within your sessions? Are you doing some reactive drills or like changing up the cues with your acceleration drills?
Generally, as someone in the private sector, I'm not going to see athletes every day because they're already doing their sport so much. So, the soccer specific bucket is going to be overflowing. And so I will polarize for the most part into track principles and basically say, hey, um, let's not worry about so much how this is going to translate to the sport because they're going to get all the opportunities to practice these mechanics when they get over to soccer and try to make it make sense. But I think it's a popular saying that you have to know the rules before you can break them. And teaching athletes kind of fundamental rules of movement is important so that they can start to make some connections in how, oh, I need to go catch up to this person that just, stole the ball from me and is heading down to score in a wide open field. Okay, you need to be able to flip that switch and find that track speed. You need to find those track mechanics and those more patient pushes so you can close that space. Then, when you're in that closed space, now you can flip back to soccer mechanics and worry about, you know, shifting and being in the right positions and go get that steal back or block the shot or whatever you have to do to turn the tides in your favor. Same thing I tell a lot of my football players is, we're working these acceleration patterns for your 40-yard dash, these top speed patterns for the 40, but this isn't necessarily how football is played. If you're a running back, you're going to be in traffic a lot. And so you need to be able to flip switches between, hey, I'm in traffic and I need to navigate my setting. And oh, there's an open gap, an open field. Boom, track, let's go. 40-yard dash, let's go. Let me see if I can create some space here and then put myself in an even better spot. And then if I have to, if someone's closing space on me, I can flip that switch again, throttle down, shift, and then again, open up those track principles and mechanics so you can get to the end zone as fast as possible.
So all soccer players should be doing jumps, working on acceleration mechanics, and then doing their acceleration drills. How often should they be doing all these things? Because I know some people are like wanting explosiveness overnight, but what's a realistic frequency and time frame to start seeing some improvements?
I think if you can get started in the off season when you're not so bogged down by the repetitive nature of soccer practice all the time, you can start to experiment with an acceleration top speed sort of program. And I think what I've found to work fairly well is about twice a week to start is a really good goal. So maybe on Monday, you're doing heavy acceleration work, whether you're on a hill, dragging sleds, you're on a treadmill, or some kind of resistance work, and you're doing everything horizontal. Whereas maybe on Thursday or Friday, you're coming back out, you might tap into some acceleration principles, but now we're going to go more vertical in all of our forces and start working on turnover and frequency and our upright top speed mechanics and building out further on flat ground and maybe even work with, running with the wind at our backs. Um, Thinking about timing some fly 10s or 40s or 30s or something. But I think if you can just get started with twice a week, that's going to be ultimately much better than never touching it at all and trying to just allow soccer to dictate, the flow of the game and the training that's necessary for the game to dictate your long-term athletic development.
That's brilliant. Now, I want everyone to follow up with you. I know you do some remote coaching, in person coaching as well. So, where can everyone find your services?
So I have a website. It's btacceleration.com. You can also find me on Twitter at Brendan Thompson, BrendanThompson. Some guy beat me to the actual Thompson, so I don't have the luxury of having the last O in my name. Um, but yeah, you can find me in those two places. I'm generally fairly responsive. And then within that, you can find my email and other ways to contact and schedule as well.
Awesome. So be sure to follow up with Brendan and all the great work he's putting out. And as the off season approaches, or if some of you are in season, you should always be working on acceleration. So definitely check out his content for more. Brendan, thank you again. This was a really great discussion.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.